Hello, everybody. Today we have Aimee Pourciau from Your Part-Time Controller with us. Thank you, Aimee, so much for being with us to talk a little bit about the financial side of the veterinarian of record relationship. We're so happy to have you. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about you and your organization?
Thank you very much for having me. As you said, my name is Aimee Pourciau. I am the director for the Denver office of Your Part-Time Controller, as well as the Animal Welfare Vertical Leader. Your Part-Time Controller has been in existence for over 30 years now, and we have 12 physical offices, and we have people and clients in over almost all 50 states at this point in time. We do financial services for nonprofit organizations, mainly outsourced controller, CFO, and bookkeeping services. And I have been in the accounting industry for over 20 years now.
Well, we're very excited to have you because we are talking a lot about the relationship between the animal sheltering world and our community veterinarians. And one of the things is about creating a financial relationship with one another. So we want to make that type of relationship successful. So shelters need to learn how to budget for that, and the veterinarians need to know how to bill for that. So let's just start off with a big question is how do each of those entities budget so that this relationship is going to be meaningful and successful for both of them?
Absolutely. So the first thing that you want to do with any type of relationship like this is you want to assess your current financial situation. Look at your financial status, including your income, your expenses, and your available resources. And then you want to determine what your actual needs are. Do you need to have a specific veterinary service? As in, do you just want them to come in and do routine checkups? Do you need them to do emergency care, surgeries, preventative measures? Do you need them to be in person or remote only? You look at all of that holistically to kind of determine what services you need for your organization. And that will go into helping you determine what compensation level you'll have for that better record. So once you kind of look at that, you'll determine what that fair compensation rate is for that vet. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. And then as you do this, you want to allocate a portion of your organization's funds specifically for this program, because you want to make sure that you have sufficient costs to cover this program, including the compensation, any medical supplies, any operational cost. And you may even want to set aside some additional funds for unexpected expenses or increases in service demands. Because, emergencies happen.
In animal welfare, it happens all the time.
All the time. Yeah.
And all of a sudden you get 50 animals that you weren't expecting. And did you plan for that?
Absolutely.
So let's start with the veterinarian side.
Okay.
So the veterinarian, a lot of times the shelters want the veterinarian to do this for free. And the veterinarian has to make a living, and the veterinarian has to be able to cover their costs. And in reality, this could be a fund generator for the veterinarian. How do they develop that type of budget that you're talking about without gouging the animal welfare organization, but making it worthwhile for them?
So to make it a successful fund generator for them, they want to make sure that they're, obviously they want to charge for their services. You can't do it for free. You're not going to go to your doctor's office and get free service. I mean, they're going to charge something, whether they're charging you or they're charging the insurance company. So there is a fee that goes along with it. So you want to make sure that you're charging a competitive rate. Now, whether or not it is how competitive that is, that's another story, but and then you want to make sure that you're streamlining the processes to make sure that you are performing services efficiently and effectively as possible. So by doing those two things, that will go into helping you make that a more of a fun generator for you. And the more that you can diversify your services as well, being remote or on site can help increase your revenue streams as well.
So if you are going to give a donation, what's the best way to keep track of that donation?
So keeping
Or a
track,
donation or a discount, I should say.
yep. Keeping track of any donations or discounts, I think, is a must, because that's going to go a part of your taxes in general as an individual. But you want to make sure that you're providing detailed invoices to the organization, and that's going to include any discounts or donations that you give to them. You want to maintain all of these records, because it could be part of an audit for taxes. For your business. So, and then you want to make sure that you're reviewing your information on a regular basis to make sure that your information, your discounts are being applied appropriately. They're being recorded in your books appropriately by your accountants, all of these things to make sure that it all makes sense and that you feel comfortable with the amount of time and effort and discounts and everything that you're giving to an organization.
So that includes if you come in and donate your services, right? I mean, a lot of times people will come in and do some spay neuters or look at a couple of animals and never bill. So what I'm hearing you say is that you should be keeping track of that as well.
Absolutely, you should be keeping track of that, because what you'll do for that is give a letter to the organization to say, I've donated 50 hours at this price, and that is a donation or an in-kind donation to that organization, because a veterinary service is a professional service that they would have to pay for, that they're not getting otherwise.
So jumping to shelters, in many ways, if the veterinarian is providing in-kind services, you should be capturing that information as well and treating them like a donor.
So the way that's recorded in, as far as the shelter goes, is they would record an in-kind revenue and expense on their books, because it would be a donation by the veterinarian, but also an expense that they technically haven't paid for, that they would have ordinarily paid for if they didn't.
And why is that important to keep track
of? Because it's services that they would have rendered should they had, if they wouldn't have received the donation. So it goes into the cost of their organization, the things that they when you think about it, if it wasn't donated, that cost would have actually been paid for with cash that they would have had to take into consideration into their organization's budget otherwise.
So if they're creating a budget line for a veterinarian of record relationship, but they expect a certain amount each year based on history of in-kind support. Are you saying that you should have multiple lines there showing that? I'm just trying to kind of understand how that would look in your budget.
So ideally, you would include that amount in your veterinary service cost, and just have that. I mean, or you could have a separate line that says veterinary service cost and then in-kind veterinary service cost, just so they understand that this is separate, that they anticipate getting that donated for free. But you do want to have that line, you do want to have that cost included in your budget.
Yeah, I hear a lot of organizations say it cost us, $50,000 to do medical care. But then when you really dig deeper into what it costs, and they're getting $150,000 worth of in-kind services, you may be doing yourself a disservice, right? So if you're going to down the road look for a grant,
right,
you're wanting to know that it costs $300,000, not $50,000, or even if you are looking at if that veterinarian no longer can provide that services, you need to know, right?
Absolutely. If that veterinarian can't provide that service and you need to go find somebody else to do it, and they want to know, well, how much are you anticipating on that service to to be provided for free, or if you had to pay for part of it. If you don't have that information readily available, it's going to be detrimental to your organization. And then if you're not budgeting for that cost, and something were to happen, you don't have that in your budget. You're not anticipating raising funds to cover that. So all of that goes into that information.
So let's talk a little bit about capacity and the budget. So, sometimes some animal welfare organizations get themselves in a situation where they have more animals than they are able to budget for. And I'm not wanting to talk about that whole issue. What I want to talk about more is how to budget and then live within your capacity.
So when you think about it, you have to review your financial records to make sure that you understand what available funds that you have on a regular basis, preferably monthly, just to make sure that how much cash do you have on hand, how much in reserves do you have, if you have reserve capacity. And then based on that, based on your development fundraising ability, based on the programmatic availability or needs that you have coming up, you have to prioritize your essential services and allocate that available funds accordingly. So maybe you anticipated having this big spay and neuter day later down the road, but you realize, hey, that person that donated the services isn't doing it anymore and you have to pay for it. Well, maybe you can't have that event because you don't have you have to pay for the vet services versus paying for that event. So or maybe you need to go get a fundraiser to pay for that event instead of paying for it out of operating funds. So thinking about things like that and making sure that you're monitoring your budget versus your actual monitoring your essential services compared to your available funds all goes into that. And just continually monitoring your cash flow to make sure that you can meet your ongoing commitments is vital.
So we have negotiated our prices in advance. We are starting the relationship. The next step is the payment and the billing. How should that work? Whose responsibility is it? Is it the shelter? Is it the veterinarian? Is that just decided and negotiated upon in the original contract? What does the process look like there?
So ideally it'd all be negotiated in that original contract. So whether it's a set number of hours at a set rate, or to that extent, how often they get paid, is it monthly, is it weekly, is it bi-weekly, all of that should be negotiated and documented within that original contract. I would suggest that an invoice is generated from the veterinarian side, to make sure that that veterinarian is documenting any discounts that they give, that they have the records on their end to track everything. And then that provides backup for the shelter to have receipts for their side of information as well. The shelter should promptly pay to maintain that great relationship with the veterinarian that's giving them. Like I said, you want to make sure that you have those clear terms and payment schedules and everything defined within that agreement. And if possible, you can set up automated payments and things like that to help remove administrative burden. Same thing with the invoice side. If there's like set days and set times and all of that can all be automated to help relieve that administrative burden on both sides of the coin.
We also have to recognize that we have so many different types of organizations, right? So if we have a governmental organization, for example, you might have to become a vendor, and you may have to have a business license, and you may have to have certain type of insurance. And all of that falls within the financial decision-making on how much you're gonna charge. And then also how much you're gonna pay as well.
Absolutely. So, yeah, each, especially for a governmental entity, they have certain steps that they're required to go through as far as approving a vendor. So whether or not they have to go get quotes and all of that to maintain their side of information. So that's why having those invoices, having all of that paperwork is vital for that specifically that type of organization in general. But having, when you're going through and setting your rate as the veterinarian for this type of program, you take all of that into consideration. How much additional work am I having to do to set up this relationship? Am I having to go buy insurance that I didn't typically have? Now, granted, I would hope that they would all have professional responsibility insurance and malpractice insurance and all of this as well. That it wouldn't be something additional that they would already have to go have for this specific relationship. But all of that kind of goes into that competitive rate that I had talked about earlier.
So is there anything that we haven't talked about that is really important for this relationship?
We kind of talked about making sure that the shelter has enough funds to pay for that fair compensation. We talked a little bit about the veterinarians are an essential service and making sure that they're being paired fairly, if I can speak. And you just want to make sure that compensation is fair, because it ensures that's a sustainable relationship. It helps reduce turnover in that and fosters a long-term collaboration with that vet of record. And kind of expecting them to give you free services can lead to ethical concerns, and kind of reduces trust within that relationship as well. So, I just kind of want to point that out a little bit. And then when you look at your budget lines for this type of relationship, obviously, like I said, compensation is the big one, obviously, but you also have to include your medical cost. If they're going to come on site, maybe they have travel expenses or expenses related to on-site expenses. And then there's also administrative costs that you have to allocate to this as well. So kind of think about what cost would those be within that budget as well. So that's from the shelter side of things. We talked about the billing.
Yeah, I think what you just said is really important, is that it's not just when you're budgeting for this, it's not just their fee. You also need to budget for your supplies. You also need to budget for your equipment. You also need to budget for your own internal staffing costs and what it costs as part of that. So it's bigger than just the relationship with this particular veterinarian. You have to look, and the same thing on the veterinary side.
Yep.
How are your staff going to be incorporated? Are you bringing any of your own equipment? All of that, how is that being? And it was interesting that you even talked about travel and mileage and gas and all of that. You have to think about the whole big picture of this program.
Absolutely. There's a lot that goes into the budgetary process. A lot of times people don't think about those minute details when it comes to what we call those indirect costs, or things that they're not necessarily thinking about when they think of, like, when you think about this vet of record, the biggest thing that you're thinking about is that compensation piece, but it has more components to it.
A lot more components. Well, we can't thank you enough for being willing to chat with us today. If anybody has any questions, can you give them an email so that they can follow up with you?
Absolutely. My name is Aimee Pourciau. So my email is my first dot last name, and I'll spell it for you because it is not spelled easily. So my first name is Aimee, Aimee, dot, and then my last name is P as in Paul, OURCIAU @yptc.com.
Aimee, you've been fantastic. We appreciate you. We appreciate you working on this, and thanks for your time today.
Thank you very much.